Hello and welcome to the Cambridge Union tonight for our literature debate. I just wanted to make a couple of remarks before we begin. Tonight we are having an official abstention side on the motion. From the outset, when we discussed it, we were clear that in this debate it would be appropriate to offer an abstention. The motion refers to two authors who are pale, male, and some might argue stale, and there is a lively and present debate on campuses across the country that literature should not be dominated by authors like this, and that's a large part of why we offered an abstention side to this motion. However, I'm begging you, the members, do not use your abstention speeches to make kind of pious comments about how it's all too difficult, how you like them both so much, or that the decision is subjective. We know it's subjective, that's why we're having a debate tonight. We want to encourage you to pick a side and to argue for it. The debate is an intellectual exercise designed to encourage us to make one-sided, perhaps even lopsided cases. This is not a seminar, and you will not be receiving marks. If you want to make an intervention on any side tonight, raise your hand and say point of information or on that point or something like that during somebody's speech. Generally, we consider the first minute and the last minute of anybody's speech to be protected. If your point is accepted, please make it brief and please wait for a microphone. There will also be an opportunity for a round of floor speeches. After the first three speeches, one in proposition, one in opposition, and one in abstention, we will then take 2 rounds of floor speeches before doing the same again. Without further ado, I would like to welcome the first speaker tonight on the proposition, Scarlet Rose. She is a first year studying HSPS at Gonville and Caius College. She won this slot through open audition. Scarlet, the floor is yours.
Oscar Wilde once said, "In matters of grave importance, style, not sincerity, is the vital thing." I hope this speech can maybe achieve a little bit of both, if all else fails. As I speak, I can almost hear the words of Wilde echo around this chamber, with their perfect mixture of vibrance, vivacity, and wit. "Now produce your explanation," he says, "and pray, make it improbable." I believe the best way to persuade you today is by talking through Wilde's powerful narratives, instead of falling into academic raptures of appreciation or criticism, important they may be. But time is limited, and I think the most resonant persuasion will be found through Wilde himself. I hope through the course of this debate that you, too, will be inclined to agree. Whilst I am in no minority in having a great respect for Orwell's pertinent writings with a chilling resonance to today's climate, I have never appreciated any writer more than Wilde. I therefore feel an obligation to defend his charming wit to you today, though, that said, he didn't doubt it much himself, famously claiming that, "I have nothing to declare but my genius." It is extremely difficult to read one of Wilde's plays without laughing out loud, even, I imagine, for his harshest critics. Conversely, it is extremely easy to read Orwell's books without smiling. A deliberate intention of the latter, no doubt, but real life provides us with enough dystopian parallels for that. We hardly need to read Orwell's Animal Farm or 1984 to ground us in reality, valuable contributions to the bookshelf of literature though they continue to be. Today, we remember Wilde for starkly different reasons from Orwell. If we know Orwell for his dystopias, we know Wilde for his relentless satire. Most of us will recognise a handful of his short but effective epigrams, be it, "Always forgive your enemies, nothing annoys them so much," or "Whenever people agree with me, I always feel I must be wrong," or "Some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go." I hope that I will cause happiness at the end of my speech today, though I fear that my fate may be in the second camp. But what we often forget about Wilde is that he, like Orwell, provides socio-political, cultural commentaries. Indeed, perhaps what is best about Wilde is that you, as the reader, have most autonomy over how you interpret his works, an autonomy which Orwell is more cautious to grant. You can read Wilde's works as a light comedy, or as something much more serious than that, a condemnation of pervasive societal norms which still resonate with contemporary audiences, be it of selfishness in the Duchess of Padua, or patriarchal norms in The Woman of No Importance, or the corrupting influences of society in The Picture of Dorian Gray. Here, it is also worthwhile to add that Wilde is first and foremost an author of humanity. He has the power to bring colour to life, to depict the true array of human emotion, a man who loved and suffered, who reached the heights of society only to fall to the bottom. An eventful life, to say the least. You are unlikely to find a writer who can truly portray what it means to be human, quite like Wilde. For just as Dorian found his unredeemable sins etched in his portrait, thinking that it was an unjust mirror, this mirror of his soul that he was looking at, I believe that Wilde's works can be understood as the mirror of humanity, from hilarity to intense suffering and pain. Orwell's works certainly reflect on the latter, but often slip into a cold and calculating world, the last thing we need after a long, trying day. Whilst reading Wilde often reminds us of our shared humanity, reading Orwell's 1984 can feel mechanical in nature. It is more difficult to absorb oneself in his words, whereas one cannot help but live through Wilde's narratives instead of feeling like a helpless observer. Where Wilde empowers us, Orwell teaches us not to trust anyone with disturbing concepts like hate week and thought crimes. That is not to say that Orwell's works aren't important and extremely thought-provoking, but instead that reading Wilde is a more humbling and gratifying experience, encompassing all of our human psyche instead, as is often the case with Orwell, the worst parts of it. As Virginia says in The Canterville Ghost, he made me see what life is and what death signifies, and why love is stronger than both. One never has to look far with Wilde before finding something serious to think about. Refreshingly, one doesn't have to look far before finding something comical and revitalizing either. And what is best is that you, the reader, have complete power over how you understand him, as detached or inherently intertwined with reality, or perhaps somewhere in between. Less so with Orwell. Presenting two polar ends of reality is Wilde's unique speciality, from inconsolable sadness to rapturous delight. And just as the truth is rarely pure and never simple, nor are his works. He has an extraordinary ability to bring his characters to life. Take Algernon, for instance, a pompous young man who sees the world as his playing field. If I'm occasionally a little overdressed, he says, I make up for it by being always immensely overeducated. Indeed, you may know one or two Algernons here. Or Mr. Otis, who takes quite an unusual approach in discovering that a ghost with eyes as red as burning coals and heavy manacles and rusty gyres hanging from his wrists and ankles is living in his house. Having been woken from his sleep, Mr. Otis has advice for the ghost. My dear sir, he says, I really must insist on you oiling those chains, and have bought you for that purpose a small bottle of the Tammany Rising Sun lubricator. Only Wilde has the power to make a gruesome, terrifying ghost quite comical and enlivening. Another reason to read his works. If Orwell shows us what it is to lament, Wilde shows us what it means to smile. If this debate were on whose writing is more politically resonant, then perhaps I may be more tempted to switch to side opposition. Or if this debate were on who is more cynical, then I certainly would. But the wording of this motion asks us who we prefer to read. I think a good way to look at this is by asking who would we like to talk to on a rainy, miserable day? Somebody who is more likely to remind you of the rain, or someone who will find beauty and art in the bleakness? I know which camp I fall into. I would like to end today on a more serious note. Wilde led a very trying life, struggling with his sexuality in a very traditional society. 120 years forward, and his works live on. His ingenious comedy devices being an integral part of the British theatre scene, and in no small part influencing the compelling humour of well-loved public figures like Stephen Fry, who stated that Wilde shows us that it is the life of the mind which will free the world. He tells us that we are powerful, unstoppable, that our thoughts can help shape a kinder and more considerate society, that each and every one of us here in this union and beyond can use our humanity to drive us forward into a more hopeful future. That is not to say that we should pay heed to every single word he speaks about as a serious reflection on politics, economics, and culture. Far from. Wilde often frees us from the tiring works of over-interpretation. But he also provides plenty of material, like in Lady Windermere's Fan, if we so desire to do that. Orwell once said that Wilde has worn well as a sympathetic and intelligent observer. I wholeheartedly agree with him. Wilde has worn well, even if he has made fewer profound comments or predictions on the contemporary political climate as Orwell. Here, I would like to reflect on Miss Prism's words in The Importance of Being Earnest. The good end happily, and the bad unhappily, that is what fiction means. Timeless comedy aside, Wilde found a sense of liberation through his writing in the midst of an otherwise alienating and troubling existence. Fiction was his freedom in the midst of repression. This, perhaps, sheds further light on Wilde's statement that man is at least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth. And to live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist, that is all. In many ways, Wilde's mask was his fiction, a way in which he could create an entire counter-universe of his own, which he shares with each and every one of us. Most importantly, Wilde is there to remind us of the meaning of laughter if ever we forget. So if this debate has persuaded you of nothing else, then I hope that when Week 5 blues hit, you will find solace and humour in his works. I promise you, it's worth it. Thank you.